Welcome to this webcast. I am delighted you are here. Thank you so much. My name is Jonathan Foust, and lined up, we've got a nice talk I think you'll enjoy. Before then, a couple of quick announcements before we launch in here. A big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this event, to our producer, Glenn Harrison, for all his technical expertise. Rita Moran leads mindful movement before class. You can check out the link for her class on my website and on my Facebook page. I've got a newsletter monthly, roughly monthly, every 3 months. I send out my best photos and a synopsis of talks and so forth. There's a weekly as well. And as I always mention, this is offered freely. There are no ads, no cost to get access. The whole idea here is that no one is denied access to these practices and these teachings if they are so called. So I really like supporting that. And if you feel drawn to support me in this, that would be awesome. Thank you. And mostly, thank you for being here. Finally, just to remind you, if you're interested, I'm offering a course called A Year of Living Mindfully, starting in September of this year. Applications are due June 1st, and you can find information about that on my website as well. It's an amazing course. It's primarily DC based, but I am looking at offering a small online pilot as well. So that is that. This talk is a little bit long. I mean, it's about 15 minutes, so we'll do a shorter meditation. But let's just launch in. We'll do a little centering, and then I'll set you up for the talk. You might like to close your eyes. You don't have to, but you can close your eyes and just take a moment to open up your senses. Sounds. What do you hear? Touch. What do you feel? Externally and internally. Any sense of smell, a lingering sense of taste, the perception of light. And taking a moment to acknowledge the mind, the brain that's processing all of this information all the time. And sensing as well, where is awareness right now? Noting this quality of what we might call the witness, the capacity to observe without judgment, without grasping, without pushing away. And if you would, bring your attention into your breath. This will be just for a few minutes. And feel free to ignore me if you like. But if you would, just inhale nice and slow to maybe the count of 4. And then exhale nice and slow, maybe to the count of 6. A little bit longer than the inhalation. And let yourself find a pattern for the next minute or so that kind of works for you, where you are breathing in slow, full, and deep, and the exhalation's a little bit longer. And you might even try this as you inhale. Just simply feel the word let. On the exhalation, go. What does it mean to let go? On each exhalation, what could let go? What does it feel like to let go just a little bit? Can you let go through the body? Softening, arriving? Could you let go in the attitude of your mind? letting go of any sense of making your experience any different than how it is. With the next three exhalations, how much more could you let go on each breath moving out? Notice the quality of presence right now. Notice if there's any commentary in the mind. And could you soften and let this go? Or you might substitute, let it be. What if you let this moment be just as it is? What is the quality of presence? Would you like, you might gently deepen your breath. Once again, a slow, full breath in, and on the exhalation, just a little bit longer than the inhalation. And again, just sensing what could soften, what could let go. If you like, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, let your body move, adjust in any way that feels good for you. And as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes or you can let them close. There's a phrase I find really, really helpful, particularly when I'm struggling. And it is the invitation to practice wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with reality. What does that mean? This practice of mindfulness is really a study of reality. What is it that's absolutely true? That truth that was true thousands of years ago and thousands of years in the future. What is that? Part of it requires effort, and part of it requires letting go of everything that it isn't. So every time we let go, there can be kind of a falling back into presence, into this timeless moment, but just for a millisecond. The following talk explores this whole sense of letting go. This is the very first talk on my podcast from 2011. And it is live, so you'll hear a couple of chuckles here and there. And I hope you find it helpful. And in your life, as you explore what it means to let go, may you find all kinds of enlivening discoveries. Enjoy the following talk. I have to admit, I have a certain paralysis inside around this talk. And the main reason is because I usually share all my jokes with Tara, and then she shares them with you. So I'm stuck. This is going to be a really somber talk. I just want you to know that. It really is horrible when I come up with a good story, And then I tell her, not only is it here, but it goes out on her podcast. So if I tell it again, then someone will say, oh yeah, Tara told that last week. It was so good. I was talking with her. I said, so what about this? She said, nah, it was 4 months ago I told that. So we kind of went through them. At any rate, it's good to be here. A topic that's been really poignant for me is letting go. There's been a lot of personal change in my life, and the more that I talk with others and work with people privately, I've really come to get a much deeper appreciation for what it means to be going through change and transformation. Robert Frost said, in 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. In the last 4 months, my mother died after a long, slow descent into Alzheimer's. And about 3 weeks ago, we just put my father into an Alzheimer's unit. My dog is almost 15, and he's not dead yet. He walks more sideways than he does forwards, but kind of holding the space for him and his transition. And we have another family dog that's also transitioning. I was just visiting with my brother, and I didn't realize that he's lost about 70% of his hearing from working. He worked at Bethlehem Steel, kind of in the pits as a foreman when he got out of college, and wrecked his health. And on and on and on. So much change, so much letting go. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we do it. How is it that we can keep a sense of presence to all that's changing around us? Ram Dass, wrote his wonderful book, Be Here Now, so many years ago. Such a powerful book. But I almost feel there should be almost a secondary book called Let Go Now. Because in order to be here now, we have to let go of everything that isn't here. And that is quite an art. And there's actually kind of a science to it as well. When I first went to visit my father in this Alzheimer's unit, my father's a very smart, very funny guy, a retired English professor, comparative literature, lived independently. And for him to be in this place where he wasn't really aware of his own dementia, so in his interpretation, he was fine, and he was surrounded by a totally chaotic world. And I walked into the door of his unit to find him at the most angry I'd ever seen him, basically yelling at the top of his lungs, saying, I am a professor, I have a life, I have things to do, you cannot keep me here. It was incredibly painful to see him in that degree of upset. And there was a real sense of helplessness. What could I do to support him in his process? The only alternatives we could think of were medication and maybe some counseling. So what I did was to practice Tonglen, of just breathing in his suffering and exhaling a sense of calm, exhaling a sense of peace. It was something very powerful in that process of not trying to push away, not trying to fix his discomfort, but to actually be with it and embrace it. And in that practice, I saw all the ways I was fearful of his mental condition, fearful of how I could relate to him, find any way to relate to him. And all my own fear of watching my own mind begin to crumble. And in that practice, I was able to be a little less fearful in my relationship with him. And over time, actually came to embrace that spiritual adage that spiritual practice is wholehearted cooperation with the inevitable. So it allowed me to actually find some interest in finding out how to be there for him in the best way I could. And I know that every one of us is surrounded by those who are struggling, those who are having challenge letting go. To keep our hearts open to this process requires paying particular attention, I think. In our practice of meditation, we see that the nature of suffering is clinging, one of the noble truths. We see that anything we're holding on to is going to lead to some degree of unsatisfactoriness, some degree of suffering. There's kind of the gross level. It's all our stuff, all of our material possessions. On a more subtle level, it's our habits. The habits that we hold dear. And over my years of living in a health center and so forth, I've really come to see that there are many people, for example, who would rather die than change what they eat. That habit is so strong. We also have to let go of our beliefs. And all we need to do is listen to the news to see the attachment to belief. People who are actually willing to die for what they believe. So when we practice non-judging awareness, we become very aware of how we're hanging on. Not just intellectually, but experientially, the visceral hanging on. And we see how hanging on leads to greater and greater suffering. If we don't let go, the holding on, the clenching, the tightening gets worse and worse and worse. Something had to give with my father. As I talked with him after his outburst and he began to settle down and apologize, he said, if there was a way to be happy here, I'd like to know how. And that was really the key. We can either change our externals or we can change the internals. If we don't address how we're holding on, then we are confined to being eternally locked in. Without investigating, we stay stuck. So my father could not understand his situation. He felt that he was being punished for something that he had done wrong, but he couldn't figure out what it was. And as he began to reflect and begin to calm, his attitude began to shift. He began to see possibilities where he hadn't seen them before. There's a very powerful practice that I do for myself and that I actually share quite a bit as part of a modality that I do called focusing, which is about really bringing our attention, identifying where our clinging is, so that we can bring investigation and look at what it means to let go. And just in a little reflection, if you like, you can close your eyes. I'll be asking a question. It'll actually be the same question, just for a few rounds. And when you hear this question, here's the invitation to hear it as if it's fresh. And then to name one thing that comes to mind. And internally, just to say hello to it, without trying to fix it, without trying to change it. And as you say hello to it, to imagine that you could just very gently place it to the side. We're not putting it away, we're not going to analyze it, but just to name what is there. Well, about 15 seconds in between each question. In your life right now, what's between you and feeling free? If you can imagine saying hello to it, placing it to the side. What's between you and feeling free? And again, what's between you and feeling free? And what's between you and feeling free? And one more time. What's between you and feeling free? You might pause for just a few moments and just acknowledge what you've named, this landscape of what is between you and feeling free. And just sensing what it's like to hold these in non-judging awareness. And you might just sense for a moment who you are in the absence of these as issues in your life. If you like, you can deepen the breath a little bit. And if you like, you can open the eyes, or you can remain with the eyes closed if you like. I find this exercise helpful. It helps me to kind of name or identify the landscape of what's present. And this troubling relationship, this anxiety about finance, this sense of dread I might have about something in my life. It really helps to identify where there is some clinging, some attachment, whether it be very subtle or perhaps a little more intense. Of course, the Buddha said, cling to nothing. Our practice is to cling to nothing. And in that very attempt of non-clinging, of course, we see how we cling all the time. All the issues that are just kind of velcroed to us. The first and second Noble Truth talk about suffering and the cause of suffering. And then there's this little promise, kind of the good news Noble Truth, that it's possible to be free of suffering. Our relationship to suffering, of course, shows up in a multitude of emotions. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross outlined them very clearly in kind of that fundamental attachment we have to this life. That when we encounter the falling away of this body, the stages of anger, denial, depression, and ultimately acceptance. We take a look at our culture right now of what's changing, what's dying. And we can see all of these stages. The anger, the rage, the depression, the blame going on right now. And the question becomes, how do we escape this trap of our own personal suffering? A big part of it, I think, is to really explore and examine the consequences of holding on. And to really feel the possibility of letting go. We all know that experience of what it means to be holding on. And so many times in my life, I know intellectually I have to let go, but I can't. I don't know how. And today I was kind of pulling out of the bank. I made a left-hand turn, and was going kind of right down the center to go straight. There was a left-hand and a right-hand turn ahead of me, and suddenly this car behind me, the horn was just blaring like a really angry, aggressive car horn. And the car kind of came up on my right, and then they made a right-hand turn. And I was really puzzled. Like, what did I do? It was a really expensive Mercedes, and there was like two big burly guys, a white guy and an African-American guy. And my first thought was like, wow, diversity in a Mercedes, that's kind of cool. My second thought was, what did I do? And as I had this whole theme of like letting go, for the next couple hours, I couldn't let it go. There was anger, there was like some unfulfilled revenge that I was feeling. There was, a sense of, what could I possibly have done wrong? And as I was kind of doing my afternoon meditation and sort of like replaying the scenario, I realized the car horn probably didn't have anything to do with me. Just kind of my hallucination. But I really struggled, like I wanted to let it go, but I couldn't let it go. Attachment happens so easily. We move so organically to attachment. And we see this in relationships. And Rilke has a beautiful 2 lines. He says, we need in love to practice only this, letting each other go. For holding on comes easily. We do not need to learn it. The mind instinctively grasps. It takes extraordinary training and extraordinary patience to train ourselves how to let go. So for myself, I lived a very, very simple life for many years. I lived in an ashram for a couple decades. And I lived in a 9 by 11 room for most of those years. And then when I left, I moved into a motorhome, which was kind of the same size, for a couple of years. And there was really something nice about that. I really couldn't accumulate anything. And in my travels, as I was traveling and teaching for about 3 years, and visiting many, many people in their homes, I realized that most houses in America have enough really for 2 houses. So when I ended up buying a house, I made a little deal with myself that I wasn't going to buy anything for the house. I just put out word to the people I knew. I had this empty house, and if anyone had anything they wanted to get rid of, to let me know. And in about 4 days, I had this this amazing house with all this great stuff. And the real benefit of this practice is when I moved about 3 years later, it was really easy. I just called up my friends, said, take what you like, and they'd all forgotten about what they'd given me. And I just invited people to come and take what they wanted. The house was empty, and I kind of moved on. I've kept the practice of living simply as best as I can. I've become a little bit of a fanatic about traveling with one bag. Little advertisement for onebag.com. It's a really interesting site about the economy of travel. So every time I would come back from traveling with one bag, I'd very carefully note what didn't I wear. So that would kind of inform my next travel. And I really kind of took that as a metaphor of really looking at what can I let go? What am I holding on to that I really, really don't need? And of course, the advantage of letting go is your bags are lighter and lighter. There's less and less to carry. It's a very powerful practice to really look at what you can let go of. What is your baggage? On the gross level of your stuff, the subtler level of your habits, and the subtlest level of your beliefs. A friend of mine who was clearing out her house and she had to downsize was really troubled by all this stuff that meant so much to her. And I had this idea, and I've actually suggested it to other people. I got out my video camera, and she told the story of what she had. And she has the video to kind of go back and look at those stories. And as Ram Dass says, we need to hold on tightly and let go lightly, to really recognize what's dear to us and to know that inevitably we need to move it on. when we look at what it means to let go in the moment, we of course realize that most of our experience is made up of thoughts of the past and thoughts of the future. And the letting go, the renunciation in our meditation practice is letting go of those stories, letting go of those memories, training ourselves how to renounce. And the interesting thing about meditation practice is that when we meditate, it's not to get anything, but to let go. There's something about this practice where perhaps you may have come in with a busy mind, and during the course of the meditation you might have been watching video reruns from the day and anticipating what's next, and something very powerful about mindfulness, this non-judgmental awareness that recognizes there's some holding on of the future, there's some holding on of the past. And little by little by little, in that moment to moment to moment renunciation of the past and future, something begins to emerge. The present moment becomes a little more alive, a little more fresh. We begin to realize that the future is actually dependent on now. The only way we can influence the future is in this moment. So how do we let go? There's a wonderful teaching story about Ajahn Chah. It's one of those stories that's so simple, it's a little bit ridiculous. But that's usually the best teaching stories. And the story is he was walking with some of his students, and he taught very, very simply through little analogies. And he was holding this heavy stick. And he just stopped and he said, "This stick, is this really heavy?" And they all said, "Yes, it's a really heavy stick." And then he said, "Not now," and he dropped it. That's the story. But it's so powerful. It's such a powerful story. Any moment that you are carrying some burden, in any moment you can drop it. What can feel inexpressibly difficult, by shifting your attention from it to the here and now, there can be a moment, there can be a millisecond of freedom. And that's the promise of these practices, the promise of these teachings. No matter how intense the suffering, no matter how tight you might be clinging, in any given moment, there's the possibility of dropping it. We speak about the practice of meditation as kind of a twofold definition. Training ourselves to be aware of what's happening while it's happening. But in addition, training ourselves to be aware of our relationship to what's happening, to how we're holding it. And that is the liberation piece. In any given moment, we can notice and examine and investigate the attitude in the mind. Wherever there is clinging, wherever there is aversion, there is possibility. Another way we can explore what it means to let go is to really explore what we're holding on to and investigate the karma of it. If we're holding on to, for example, a habit that is not wholesome, to really contemplate the karma of not letting it go. And sometimes this can provide a very powerful recognition. And neuro-linguistic programming takes it out a little bit further, where they'll actually have you train yourself to associate pain to not letting go and massive pleasure to letting it go. So if you have a smoking habit and you want to quit smoking, you visit a cancer ward and talk to people who have cancer as a result of smoking. And then plan on what you're going to do with all the money you're going to save. And that can be a very powerful way to shift your relationship to something you're holding on to that you might let go. Perhaps one of the most powerful ways of letting go is we talk about the power of investigation, particularly in Vipassana, is to investigate what it feels like inside. Anything we're holding on to investigate as intimately as we can the experience of clinging, the experience of suffering, the experience of all the emotional flowering that comes out of attachment and out of clinging. Another way to explore in that same way is the beliefs of what we're actually believing in any given moment can provide a very, very powerful doorway. I know for myself, I think every time I do a longer retreat, I have the kind of the same insight. And the same insight is, if I just don't believe my mind, I'd be feeling a lot more happy. And occasionally I've had some times in meditation where I'll find myself completely wrapped around some issue. And I'll just sort of sense what I'm really thinking about it, the belief I have about it. And I'll just be this little do I really believe that? Do I really believe that story? Really examining the stories that we carry inside can be a very powerful liberation practice as well. There's also something very powerful in this practice about sensing who we are in relationship to what we're holding on to. There's a very powerful practice that sometimes when I may be in dialogue with someone and we're exploring some issue. I remember talking with someone and they were just talking about their fear of money. They were just feeling really scared about scarcity. And I asked her, if money wasn't an issue, what would it feel like inside? And as she really sat and examined that, there was an expansiveness. There was a sense of gratitude. There was a sense of flow. In our practice, when we can disidentify from our issues, wonderful things can open up inside. And so we have to ask ourselves ultimately, in this question of letting go, who is it that's letting go? In the ashram, there was a number of people who took lifetime vows of being a monk. And I was sort of like junior varsity monk squad. I wasn't ready for the big one, but when you would sort of make the next step, you were given a new name. And I was talking with one of the fellows who just made a lifetime vow, and he was moved into a new room. He was given a new name, and I kind of looked at his room, and there was hardly anything in there. He had like 2 books and just a couple sets of clothing. And I said, "How did you do this?" And he said it was really, really easy. His new name was Gitanand. And he said, I just looked at everything that belonged to Govinda, and I asked myself what belonged to Gitanand. And I let go of everything that belonged to Govinda. So he had sort of the shift in identity that sort of helped him to recognize what he could take forward in his life. He was able to make a clear distinction between his old self and his new self. So when you think about what's between you and feeling free, it's a very powerful inquiry to ask, who is the you in that question? Who are we really? Yoga philosophy says that we are Sat Chit Ananda. We're truth, knowledge, and bliss. Buddhism might speak more of who we are in the absence of certain factors, in the absence of greed, and in the absence of hatred, and in the absence of delusion. In the absence of these 3 poisons, there is a quality of unbounded awareness, a quality of sort of limitless, compassionate cognizance. For many years, I had a renunciation vow. I had a vow of poverty, a vow of celibacy. And it was a very powerful practice for me. At first, it felt very much like I was sort of like, it was very difficult to give up. Certainly, the celibacy piece in my 20s and 30s was quite a workout. But I really came to understand that renunciation is about letting go of what's between you and being happy. It's about identifying what it is that's between you and your true nature, the true nature of happiness and peace and equanimity. And it requires a certain kind of rigor to really examine your life and to really examine what cultivates a more wholesome state. What in your possessions, in your habits, in your beliefs cultivates a less than wholesome state? And could you let that go? What would help you in letting that go? Monasteries have existed for a very, very long time to give us a taste of that experience of stepping away from our entanglements. As we used to say back in the ashram, no car problems. No relationship problems. It's helpful to step away. If you have the opportunity to do a longer retreat, when you step away from all of your habits, from telephone, TV, movies, email, Vmail, all of that, and simply receiving what comes your way, moment by moment, day after day, something becomes clarified inside. Something in that renunciation, in that letting go, reveals more of who you are. And meditation does that too. Anytime you can pause, it does that. Stopping to breathe at a traffic light does that. Just pausing and feeling the palms of your hands right now does that. Reflecting on contentment does that. And training ourselves to embrace the moment as it is does that. Reflecting on how we give, how we can give back, how we can serve, it does that too. There was once a wealthy man who went to the Buddha, and he said, I've got a lot of material wealth. This is part of my karma. I hear your teachings. Your teachings make a lot of sense. Can I practice your teachings without giving up my stuff? That was a great question. And the Buddha reportedly said, yes, you can, but it is not easy. You have to remember that everything you hold dear is impermanent. There's another story of a guru in India, and one of his devotees came and gave him this beautiful cup that he had made. Just really an awesome, exquisite piece of work. And he set it by the guru, and a strong wind came and knocked it over, and it broke. And this fellow who had just given him the cup was just so upset. So upset for himself and upset for the guru. He'd given him this beautiful gift. And the guru said, it was already broken. Everything that we hold dear will fall away. That's the bad news. The good news is if you know that deeply in the cells of your being, then you can enjoy and savor the miracle of everything you have and everything you hold dear. You can be with a loved one and see the miracle in them, and you can see them looking back at you. This is really about seeing into the nature of reality. That everything changes. That your suffering is in direct relationship to what is changing. And the realization that this self that is holding on is also imbued with impermanence. And Jack Kornfield said this: once we see that everything is impermanent and ungraspable, and that we create a huge amount of suffering if we are attached to things staying the same, we realize that relaxing and letting go is a wiser way to live. Letting go does not mean not caring about things. It means caring about them in a flexible and wise way. So in my own personal practice of wholehearted cooperation with reality and with the inevitable, it's really helped me to savor every day that my old decrepit dog can still walk around and pee on things. And it really helps me to savor every day that my dad can walk around and pee on things too if he wants to. The more I let go, the more freedom I feel. Even though there's a crumbling that's happening. Even though there's a comfort level that's being stripped away. So for me, it's a poignant time with so much old age, sickness, and death around me. There's a lot changing. And there's something in me that doesn't like it. There's something in me that resists it. But I take peace in knowing that I'm not alone. Attachment is really, really easy. Letting go is not. Just reflecting on those words again by Rilke. We need and love to practice only this: letting each other go. For holding on comes easily. We do not need to learn it. To the degree we can let go, we're free. And that's the promise of these practices. And the Buddha said these words: in the end, these things matter most. How well did you love? How fully did you love? How deeply did you learn to let go? So why don't we close with a little meditation, a little reflection on this practice of letting go. There's a beautiful breath I find that has been very helpful for me. It's a particular form of pranayama or breath control. And that is to lengthen your inhalation just a little bit longer than what feels natural. And on the exhalation, to consciously relax and to let the breath fall away. And you might sense if you can establish a pattern with your breath, lengthening the breath in, on the out breath, letting the breath fall away. On the out breath, just sensing inside what it means to let go. Sensing what could soften, what could relax. Letting go of the future. Letting go of the past. Letting go of pushing away, of aversion. letting go of grasping. And you might sense in your own way of who you are in the absence of anger, of judgment, of blame. Sensing who you are in the absence of clinging, of wanting. Sensing who you are in the absence of worry, of anxiety. Sensing who you are in the absence of heaviness, of sadness. And sensing who you are in the absence of doubt, in the absence of self-criticism. And in these final minutes, you might reflect on who you are imbued with the qualities of the four immeasurable states, of who you are imbued with compassion, who you are filled and imbued with kindness, who you are filled and imbued with joy, and who you are imbued with equanimity. And you might, if you wish, to engage again into the breath, lengthening the breath in, softening on the breath out. Imagining these qualities of the immeasurables radiating in all directions to all beings without discrimination. Offering it fully, deeply, and sincerely to yourself, to this breath, to each cell of this body. Thank you for your very kind presence and attention. May you let go into an extraordinary evening and to everything beyond. Thank you so much. A wonderful evening.